Well, good morning, Algebra 1 students again. I'm glad to see a few of you yesterday at 8:30, kind of going over some of the work. We're going to keep doing section 9.6 and 9.7. Today's going to be, again, we're going to review. We're going to hit this. This is just some things you really need to know. And so we're going to hit it, like I said, multiple times. So again, we're solving equations by factoring. And we're solving quadratic equations using square roots. Okay, two different methods depending upon how the equation looks. All right, I'm going to X myself out here, and then we're going to go through this. You do have guided notes. Just kind of, let's see if we can get you there, see what they look like. Modules. I keep messing with this till I figure this out. This isn't published yet. Will be when you look at this, but it should say guided notes. You can print those out. There were two worksheets for the homework. They'll be attached to the video as well. So you could use that, and then this will be the lesson video that'll be filled in. So you can print those out or just look at them. You don't necessarily need to print them out. You can just write out the problems because you don't have to do every problem. As you look up here, worksheet 9.6b, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and 21. And then worksheet 9.7b is 6 through 14 even, 15 and 17. Make sure you're writing all the problems down. All right, let me go back here and go through the lesson. So hopefully you printed off the guided notes. That's the best thing to do if you have access to that. If not, you can just use regular notebook paper. All right, section 9.6, we're still dealing with equations by factoring. If you have, okay, for number one here, if they are already in parentheses, that is a good thing. Okay, when that is the case, we are basically using the zero product property, which means if two things multiply equals 0, then one of them has to be 0. So A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. Well, in this case here, we got two sets of parentheses. X minus 2 equals 0 and X plus 3 equals 0. Now, one thing you got to remember is you actually have to solve it, which means you have to add 2. So you get X equals 2. You have to subtract 3. You get X equals negative 3. So we do get two answers. Usually write your in smallest answer first, so it'd be negative 3 comma 2. Okay, make a set of braces there. Okay, so if you have two sets of parentheses, they've already done the work for you. They've kind of helped you out. Don't make it harder. Don't multiply them back together. Now, if you have a quadratic trinomial here, 3 terms, second degree, we have to factor that. Remember, I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to get 15 and add together to get negative 8. The only way that can happen is they're both negative. So negative 5 and negative 3. If there's no number in front of the x squared, you can immediately write as x minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0. Now, I know a lot of you just are more comfortable and you will do it this way, and that is fine. And if you do it this way, you take out your grouping, the grouping method, you take out a common x. And when you divide, you get x minus 5. Here, if this is a negative, you have to make sure your GCF is a negative. In this case, it would be negative 3. Make sure you bring your sign down. Negative 3x divided by negative 3 is x. 15 divided by negative 3 is minus 5. Now you got the same thing in parentheses. X minus 5 times x minus 3 equals 0. All right, so we got the same thing. Now, we're not done, depending on which way you do this. So you got x minus, you got to set it equal to 0 because I got a product of two things. And I get x minus 3 equals 0. Add 5. Add 3. And so my two answers are 3 and 5. Okay, so that's where you have to factor it. Okay, if it's in parentheses, that's good. It saves you a couple steps. If it's not in parentheses, we have to make it in parentheses and then factor it. All right, this third one here. One of the key things is your equation has to equal 0 for this to work. Okay, if it doesn't equal 0, we cannot use this property right here. So if it's not set equal to 0, you have to make it equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 27. I get x squared plus 6x minus 27 equals 0. All right, no number in front of the x squared. I need two numbers that multiply equal negative 27. Add to get 6. All right, think about it. One of them has to be negative. One of them has to be positive. I'll tell you, one of them is negative 3. What's the other one? 9. Now, that means my two factors are x minus 3 times x plus 9 equals 0. I get x minus 3 equals 0. X plus 9 equals 0. Add 3. And now I subtract 9. And I get my two answers. So my two answers are negative 9, positive 3. All right, these are all from section 9.6, where it is either already factored, like the first one, or number 2 and 3, you have no number in front of the x squared, but we have to factor it. All right, 4 and 5 get a little bit harder because there are numbers in front of the x squared. So you have to be careful here. All right, remember how we do these. We got to take a step first. We have to take the first number, which is a 2, and the last number, and multiply them together. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. Now I need to find two numbers that multiply to get negative 12, and they still add together to get the middle number, which is in this case a 1. All right, what multiplies to get negative 12 and adds to get 1? One has to be negative and one has to be positive. The bigger number has to be positive. Negative 3 is one number and the other number is 4. You cannot, those are not your answers. You must rewrite this. You keep the first term and the last term the same, and we split up our x into minus 3x plus 4x minus 6 equals 0. Okay, don't forget the 2x squared and the minus 6 have to stay. Now we group. And we take out a GCF. Well, the only thing in common of the first two terms is an x. The only thing in common of the second two terms is just a 2. So if I take out an x, and now when I divide both by 2, make sure you put a plus, whatever that middle sign is, put that with the GCF. I get another 2x minus 3. We want those two parentheses to match up. So there I get 2x minus 3 times x plus 2. 2x minus 3 equals 0. X plus 2 equals 0. All right, now since it's not automatically going to be that number. Some people automatically just jump to and put it as a 3. You have to add 3. And then when I divide by 2, just leave it as 3 halves. You don't need to write it as a decimal. Subtract 2 for this one. We get negative 2 as our answer. So our two answers are -2 and 3/2. All right, so number in front of the x squared makes things a little bit difficult, or makes it a little bit more difficult. Okay, for this one here, not only do I have a number in front of the x squared, it doesn't equal 0. We need to make it equal 0. Subtract 24. So I get 6x squared plus 7x minus 24 equals 0. Okay. All right, now this is a little more difficult because what two numbers do I multiply together? I got to multiply 6 times -24. And that gives me -144. So I need two numbers that multiply to equal -144, add together to equal 7. All right, this is going to be a little bit more difficult. I'll give you a clue. If I remember right, I believe one of the numbers is a -9. And if the first number is a negative, the second number has to be what? Positive, because you got to multiply to a negative. Well, here's how you test it. If I take a negative, I don't need to worry about the negative at this point. If I take 144 divided by 9, I get 16. So if the first one's -9, the second one's positive 16, do they multiply to get -144? Do they add together to get 7? They do. So those are our two numbers. Keep your first term, which is 6x squared, the same. Minus 9x plus 16x minus 24 equals 0. All right, there's a couple, you gotta be careful on this one. A couple spots where you can make mistakes. 6x squared minus 9x, what's your GCF? What number will go into 6 and 9? Biggest number is 3, and they both have an x. All right, what's the biggest number that goes into 16 and 24? Biggest number. 2 goes into it, 4 goes into both of them, but the biggest number is 8. Plus right here, so make that a plus 8. And then when you divide, 16x divided by 8 is 2x. -24 divided by 8 is not 8, it is 3. Equals 0. Now you can break it apart into the 2x minus 3 times 3x plus 8. All right, not done. 2x minus 3 equals 0. 3x plus 8 equals 0. Add 3. Divide by 2. X equals 3/2. Subtract 8. Subtract 8, divide by 3. X equals -8/3. So my smaller number is -8/3. My bigger number is 3/2. Don't just leave them like that. Don't worry about making decimals because they don't work out to whole numbers. All right, that is section 9.6. Those two there are the hardest problems we can come across. We got a number in front of the x squared. All right, square roots. And I talked about in the small group on Tuesday a little bit is that what makes a problem that you use square roots different from the one that you don't is there's no x term. So if you have x squared plus 6x plus 9, we're going to look to factor because we have that 6x right there. If it doesn't have an x term, we can square root and then by getting the x squared by itself. If you got it like this, now don't forget, this is where you got to do plus or minus square root of 9, and you get plus or minus 3. You can leave that answer That is absolutely fine, or you can rewrite it as 2. Here's why. We want what squared equals 9? Well, you know 3 squared equals 9. And -3, remember, you have to put that in parentheses when you square it. And -3 squared will also equal 9. So both answers work. Okay, if x squared is not by itself. Now again, I have no x on any of these, which means I can use square roots. I want to get the x squared by itself, so add 48. Well, what's -12? Plus 48 gives me 36. Now I can take the square root, plus or minus, square root of 36, and I get plus or minus 6. All right, so there's your two answers, -6 or 6. All right, that one we had to add a number over if you got a number in front of the x squared. Again, no x term. There's no x anywhere. In this case here, if you got a number multiplying, you just divide by 4, which gives me x squared equals 25. Take the square root of x squared, make sure it's plus or minus. I get plus or minus 5. All right, I don't know if I have it coming up in this little segment, but it came up early in the first notes on Monday. What if you end up with like x squared equals -16? Remember what happens when you have an x squared equals a negative. If you go to take the square root, you're going to get what message? When you do second square root, -16, you get an error message, no real answers. You cannot take the square root of a negative. So there are no real solutions if that happens, okay? As long as it's a positive, it works. When you are done and you got the x squared by itself and you got a negative, no real solutions. 25x squared plus minus 9 equals 0. All right, no x term yet. The x squared by itself, divide by 25. Okay, if I take this, 9 divided by 25, gives me a decimal. I don't want that. Leave that. Also, you need to recognize those are two numbers that we actually already know the square root of. We know the square root of 9 is 3. And we know the square root of 25 is 5, plus or minus. So go ahead, keep it like that. X squared will equal plus or minus square root of 9 over 25. And that means x equals plus or minus 3/5. And that's all you would do. Leave it like that. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 25 is 5. 4x squared equals -49. Divide by 4. Divide by 4. You get x squared equals -49 over 4. All right, what's the problem here? Can't take the square root of a negative, even if it's a fraction. So if you got x squared by itself and that is a negative number and it will not simplify to be positive, no real solutions. You're done with it. Nothing you can do. Got it? If it was a positive, then we could take the square root. Now, the very last case here, we didn't do a ton with it. We did a little bit with it earlier. If you see this, oh, holy cow, hold on. Let me do something here. All right. If it tells you to round, then we have to follow directions. We have to round our answer. You got 6x squared equals 84. Divide by 6. 84 divided by 6 is 14. We want to go ahead and do that because I don't know the square root of 84 and I don't know the square root of 6, and it comes out to a nice whole number. Now take the square root of 14. Now it says the nearest hundredth. Which would be 2 decimal places. So what was that? 3.74165. 74165. This is the hundredth spot, so you look to the right of it. And if it's 5 or above, you move the 4 up. And if it's 0 or 4 or below, you leave it alone. So your x is going to equal plus or minus 3.74. All right, I think that concludes the day. You're just going to keep hitting this stuff. We will have a quiz on Friday. All right, here's your homework. Do this on a separate sheet. Write the original problem down and show your work. Now you can print it off under the modules, but I also have on here, here's 9.6, okay? Really, you are just doing on 9.6, the middle column, and on 9.7, 6 through 14, even, and then 15 and 17. Now it says round to the nearest hundredth. It means you're going to get a decimal for an answer. Okay, hope everything's going well. I'll be in touch.